No matter what kind of setbacks we face that slow us down or derail our progress, we pick ourselves up, we face life, and we keep going. And we do a really good job of that, right? But how often do we not realize that we might be stuck mentally and emotionally because that part of our story still stings? It still brings up shame, self-doubts, and regrets because, life just happens and we don't always have the time to process those experiences fully. And we might not even realize we're stuck in our pain. But I'll tell you what it looks like. It looks like being angry a lot, or being cynical and jaded, or maybe passive aggressive. And, we can be good at moving on and making life happen and taking care of things. But what we really need for our own personal balance is a way to reframe each experience that is a part of our overall success story. It's really true. We are in a success story. But how do we figure out how to make even the stuff that we're not proud of or that we wished we hadn't had to deal with, how do we make that a part of the story? The thing is that we want to extract the value from the experience so we can own those wins, but we have to be able to also truly leave the pain from the past in the past so that we can actually think and talk about our experience in more positive terms and show up more wholeheartedly and more balanced as we move forward. And so in this video, what we're going to do is identify some hidden obstacles that keep us stuck in those things that went wrong. We're going to look at how we can reframe our outlook with holistic balance perspectives and explore a two-step method of processing your experiences with some intentions that I'll include that hopefully will help you along the way. And after watching this, you'll know some steps to take to make more peace with your past and find your personal balance to be more balanced in future situations. And by the way, if you're new here, I'm Heidi, and I've been obsessed with fostering balance in my life and my relationships for over 50 years, and I'm here to share what I've learned to support and encourage you in your own balance journey. So let's get started. This is the Balance Journey, where we're all about turning challenges into growth opportunities and bringing mindfulness to everyday life. So let's start with those hidden obstacles that can sometimes keep us stuck in what went wrong. No matter if we've moved on in life and in time, we are still mentally and emotionally in some turmoil. In order to illustrate this, I'm going to be sharing a story from my past that I think really helped me to understand this entire process as I worked through my own pain. And that is having received criticism as a young mother by my dad, and the dynamic that I guess was something I didn't realize with my dad. I was always trying to please him, and therefore his critique of my mothering to my young boy, my 3 years old, I just came down really hard on my own son. And I continued this relentless expectation of myself, and everything I think for years that I did was with this kind of nagging thing in the back of my mind that said, do better, and all related to that criticism, which if I had been more mentally and emotionally healthy, I would have received in a totally different way. So I definitely did work through years of inner pain over that. I did eventually see the bigger picture, and I changed that pattern with my son over the years, and we did truly resolve things. So I'm glad to say right up front that, that has turned into something beautiful. But at the same time, while I was stuck, and I didn't even realize the mindsets I was stuck in. So I'm sharing these 3 mindsets that I feel we often get stuck in for you to consider for yourself. Because I think this relates to all of us. No matter what situations happen, maybe for you it's a divorce or a major accident or some sort of betrayal or humiliation, failure, rejection, injustices, somebody in your family committed suicide, or it just gets worse and worse and worse. And I know personally people in all those walks of life dealing with things. Well, we always start by dealing with that fallout. We're good at that. So now what we're doing is we are recognizing the mental and emotional obstacles that are keeping us stuck there. Okay, so the first thought process that I think we get stuck in is the if this, then that. The if he or she would have just done X, Y, or Z, then, it would have been different. It can be if you would have been more or been less, or done more or done less. And you can be putting that upon yourself, or you can be putting that on someone else. But the main idea is that you're in this whole feeling of, being stuck in a do more bargaining kind of mind frame. If I just do more, or if I just did more. And even though we know that we can't go back in most situations, this is where we beat ourselves up again and again and again. So it's important for us to see it and recognize, oh, I'm in that mind frame of, if this, then that. Then we can actually be more able to interrupt that. So that's the first thought process. And included in that is this whole idea that, well, I feel like I was doing everything right, so I shouldn't have had to go through those bad things. As soon as we face something that is shaking us up, and we feel like, but we've been trying so hard to get it all right, and we ask ourselves why, or we ask the universe why, because we're so stuck in that feeling of, I was doing so much and I was trying so hard. And that mindset is, again, that bargaining mind frame of, isn't it supposed to be that if I do the right things and I do enough things, then I shouldn't have to go through things. So in those things, I will say that my story was, very much I was on hyper alert and overdrive. I definitely, as soon as that critique came from my dad, and this was after me having moved away and then coming back and feeling like, I'm really doing great in life, and I'm raising my young son, and I felt very secure in myself. But you go back to old patterns with your parents or with your siblings or with certain dynamics in life, and his critique, it just never pointed out all the positives. All it said was this one thing that he said, I'm not sure that you're keeping track of that, and that, you got to be careful with that. And by doing that, I was on hyper alert, and I was always thinking I got to do more to prove that I've got a handle on things. And like I said, that kind of thinking was not conscious. It was definitely in the background, but it kept me mentally stuck and emotionally stuck for a while. And the second thought process that I think we can get stuck in is this idea of it could have or it should have been different. This comes down to the things that go against our sense of balance. We might have had expectations that were crushed, and we see them as failed plans, or, our openness was mocked, where that's about humiliation and rejection. We feel a sense of balance, fairness was ignored, and, those are injustices. So we know all these things. We know them on the deep level of balance that I talk about in the balance journey. And our inner voice is angry. It's angry with ourselves, or it's angry with others. I was so stupid, I was so naive, or we don't really know how to forgive ourselves or others in this moment. And I think we are stuck in a perfectionist or judgment mind frame. In those times of thinking could have or should have, everything is about, again, if I just do everything right, or if we just set it all up, then we don't have to face the bad stuff. And in my story, I did not realize that I had been pushing myself to be perfect for my whole life, and I was pretty good at meeting the mark in a lot of different ways. And when you are good at it and somebody tells you, yeah, but still you could be doing better, it can be very crushing. At least it was for me. So I couldn't stand the idea of being judged on, my motherhood and stuff. And there were so many things that I was getting right, and here's that one thing that was being picked out. So this idea of could have, should have been different, it was definitely running in the back of my mind, and it definitely played into how I was mothering from that point on. And the third thought process that I think we have to look at, that we may not realize we're stuck in, is this feeling of, I've lost. I have lost, not in a game or something, but in things like status, things like someone's valuing you, so forth. I felt that I had lost. And in other situations, with death or some other kinds of tragedies that we're still trying to make peace with, you might have lost a loved one, you might have lost value in the community or whatever it might be. In any of those things, what I think we're doing is we're actually in the grieving process. We're grieving not just for our physical losses, the things that we can no longer get back, but we're grieving a lot more. And I think this is where it really is grief that goes deeper, kind of the grieving of the inner child, because we're grieving things like lost innocence, we're grieving trust, we're grieving openness and confidence. We feel like we have lost the ability to make someone happy because we just weren't enough, and all of those things are in the background of our minds. And in my case, I definitely felt that I had lost my status, my sense of worth in my father's eyes. And I had kind of been away for a while, and having come back to visit, I did not realize that I had been working all my life to maintain that status and doing a good job of it. But still, when we face that idea of I've lost something, then we can actually face it more fully, gently, but fully. And we can start figuring out, okay, well, yes, I have lost, and I will actually acknowledge that. But what have I gained? What have I gained? Because then we won't stay stuck in that loss. So how do we reframe those experiences so that we can accept that we feel or we felt that way, but we don't let the guilt and the shame and the regret press down on us anymore and keep us stuck there? Well, I've got 4 steps that I think can help to reframe and process what has happened so that we can actually integrate the wins of our situation into our story. And the first one is that we have to remind ourselves again of the dynamic balance perspective. You know, we already explored some basics about dynamic balance in my 5 essential perspectives video. And we covered the things that all things are seeking balance, that balance is vibrational and we have to pay attention to the vibrational aspect. Balance is our natural state, and yet we have to be proactive in seeking it, but it will come easily to us because it is our natural state. And that leaning into connection to spirit is definitely part of what we need to include for our own personal peace. So I'm going to link that video in the description below because I think that's a very important video in understanding the balance journey and being supported in that. But now we're going to go a little bit deeper and broader in the sense of dynamic balance. And we're going to talk about the idea that, okay, life is simply an ongoing cycle or process, a cycle of death and rebirth, whether that's physical death, mental, emotional, spiritual. It's like we are letting go of something and we are creating something new. And it's a process that we don't always do consciously, but is definitely a cycle that is all through life. And it's also a process of releasing, where we're releasing limits and we're expanding. We're finding greater possibilities. So kind of like a cycle of metamorphosis, you know, where we often have to go inward like a caterpillar does, you know, when they create the chrysalis around themselves. That's kind of how it is in our own life situations. Sometimes life forces us, or we can choose to go inward and to pay attention earlier than later. But the idea of having to go inward is just a cycle that happens in all of life, and it allows us to find new expressions of self, of ideas, and so forth. And so these cycles that we're going through, okay, if we're thinking of that in terms of dynamic balance, then we just stop judging the tough stuff of life and staying stuck there. I mean, it's not fun. A lot of it is not okay, especially if someone puts something on you, hurt you, and so forth. All of that is something we have to acknowledge as it's not okay, but we stop judging the tough stuff of life and staying stuck. Instead, that we just accept, okay, balance involves change, and it involves things falling away. It involves me finding strength and moving forward, up leveling and expanding, because that is going to be what helps us feel more steady. You know, we have to be able to see that thread of continuity of all things in life and understand that our story is within that bigger picture, and therefore there's a continuity in our growth and in our success. And I really think if we stop making it about fault or blame, and we just start wherever we are, regrets and all, and we just say, okay, how can I find my personal balance within the dynamics of what I'm in? That is the key. To seek for our personal balance no matter what, and reframe it as it's a part of a bigger thing. So therefore my balance within the dynamic balance might still feel a little bit like this, you know, it's not static and it's not like everything is set, but how do I just kind of stay with it? That keeps you in personal balance even as life continues to go. So that's the first part of reframing in how you're going to look at things. It's thinking about the dynamic balance in that even broader and deeper sense. And then I think we need some ground rules for how we think and talk to ourselves. I think that's an important part of reframing because, I mean, just like I said in my own experience, you know, and I'm sure in any of our lives, we tend to beat ourselves up. We tend to speak harshly to ourselves. We expect such high levels of perfection from ourselves. And so having some ground rules for how we think and talk to ourselves is going to be important. And so here are some of the things that I think are essential. we have to be able to validate our thoughts and our intentions. That's the thing that you have to consider in your experience, okay? You might say, I didn't do it well, or, I could have done it better. Whatever regrets you have, if what you're trying to do is just look at your thoughts and intentions and say, I have to validate those. They are what they are. And even if no one else gets you or your actions, that you make peace with you. You do this with self-honesty. Just face, if you did it badly, then you say, okay, I did it badly. I wish I did it better, but I didn't. I did it badly. And you face that with self-honesty, but you also face it with self-compassion. If somebody else was telling you their story, you would be telling them, look, you couldn't have done any better. In that moment, you were angry, or in that moment, you were so sad and you reacted in that way. So in the same way, the first thing we have to do is validate our thoughts and intentions in the experience with that kind of self-honesty, but also self-compassion. We have to find our balance and make peace with our part in the scenario. And, in that sense, understanding that these are universal experiences of learning is an important thing. We think, I went through something and I could have avoided it. But what if we realized that actually we all, even though our details are different, we all have these experiences of learning that we have to go through. Nobody is special or singled out. We're not the only ones who are suffering. We just have the same kinds of things where we have to say, wow, I learned to face my flaws through that experience. That's a universal kind of lesson. We all have to go through that. Or I learned to take people off their pedestal and stop putting them so high. I realized they're just like me. They're human, they're flawed. And we also learn to accept that we just couldn't do differently at the time. That's an important lesson for us to learn. It's a universally needed lesson, and we all come to it in our own ways. And, we also learn that no one is coming to save us. And that's an interesting concept, but we sometimes wish that somebody would have just showed up and helped us avoid the whole thing in the beginning, or that person would have done better so that we wouldn't have had to go through what we went through. And in that sense, we are learning that it's just up to us to use our resources and our will to make good things no matter what we're dealing with. So that's another aspect that we need to have as a ground rule, is that we just have to tell ourselves, look, we all go through learning experiences. It's okay that I had to go through this learning experience. However I feel I did at that. It's not something I'm going to judge myself for anymore, because it's the learning that in all of life we're all meant to do. You couldn't have avoided it. And here's the truth, this might feel like some tough love, but we all go through these lessons, even though our details are different, but we really kind of have to get over ourselves. Just find our personal balance for the sake of, regardless of what we had to deal with, regardless of how hard it is, or it feels like, well, I had to do harder stuff than you had to do. The main thing is that we want balance. That's our natural state, and we just want to feel it for ourselves. So no matter what, even if it's true that you were the right one, whatever situation you're in, a divorce or anything like that, you tell yourself, what matters to me is that I find my personal balance. So my ground rule is that I will just see this as one of the things that we're all meant to learn. I happen to learn it through a divorce or through a major accident or whatever it is. And again, another ground rule then is you have to humble yourself. We all have to do it. We have to humble ourselves to just say, okay, I'm just going to do my best to seek my personal equilibrium. As much as I would like to fix things, change things, and don't think I'm not into fixing and changing things. We all are going to continue to make an impact on the world. But in terms of personal balance and finding your center, the idea of humbling yourself to just do your best, to focus on finding your equilibrium, that's got to be a ground rule in how you reframe all these regrets, because all those regrets are still playing with the idea that, maybe I could have done it differently, maybe they should have done it differently. And finally, definitely a ground rule is to focus on what you are grateful for, despite the challenge. And I'm sure you're already doing so. We're good at that. But it's like you have to bring that to the forefront. Your gratitude for what is good and what is right despite the situation is a huge factor. And if you make it a ground rule for yourself to say, yeah, I know about the stuff that didn't go right, but I'm not going to keep bringing that to the forefront. I am going to acknowledge it so that I can set it aside, and then I'm going to bring forth the stuff that I'm grateful for that is good in this situation or that is good about me. To keep you centered in these ground rules, I do have an intention statement that I think you can read to yourself whenever you want to remind yourself of these ground rules. I accept that there are lessons for my growth and strength within this experience, and I'm ready to claim them. I am willing to face my regrets and losses with both self-honesty and gentle compassion because I'm done staying stuck in my emotional prison. I believe that I will move forward more fluidly as I do this work of fully owning my experiences. Okay, so if we've reframed how we see our experiences, of measuring our experiences with that dynamic, balanced perspective and setting some ground rules for ourselves, then we still have to process our experiences. And that's where we take the following 2 steps. The first part is to stop glossing over what you've lost. And you may not realize you're doing this, but stop glossing over what you have lost, where you're like, get over it, move on, or other people are glossing over it. You start giving yourself permission to grieve fully. Now, in my opinion, we can't skip this. We have to acknowledge the essential thing that we have lost. And only you can identify those essential things that you feel you've lost. Sometimes it's like you've lost your ideal of what your relationship would have been like, or you've lost certain abilities like from an accident or an injury. You may have lost trust or confidence or open-heartedness, And like I said in my story, I felt like I had lost my sense of worth in my father's eyes. So while that may seem very minute to bigger losses, the point is we all feel it deeply as our loss. And so acknowledging the loss for what it is important. It's your loss, and don't gloss over it anymore. Be with that loss. If we can be honest with ourselves about our flaws, our deficits, our limitations, and other people's flaws and limitations and so forth, then we no longer think it's all your fault or it was all my fault. We begin to have a little bit more balance. You have to be honest with yourself and balance out the part you played, the part others played, and come to peace with that in terms of just accepting where that landed, however it was at the time. And if you're just more willing to be with your grief, long enough to acknowledge those things, the good, the bad, the ugly, and without judging yourself or others, you kind of like play it on a movie reel in your mind, and you see it for what it was and you accept it. If you can say, I'm disappointed. I was disappointed with my father. I can tell you that. I was disappointed with his finding the one thing that he felt I could do better at without acknowledging all the positives. And I didn't know I was disappointed. I just knew that I went on overdrive. But when I started to process this, I understood that, I'm going to put some of the blame on him, because what I did at that moment was put it all on myself and motored on. And when I finally started processing that, I realized that I never put some of that blame on him and said, wait a minute, come on. The one little thing, you've blown it up into something big and you haven't given credit for all of the other things. So make sure that there's that sense of being honest with yourself, seeing the entire thing, and getting to a point where you can say, yep, that part was mine. I take responsibility for it. But you know what? That part was theirs. And whether they ever take responsibility for it themselves, that you're no longer taking it on yourself. That's the important part for processing. And again, accept that it is a process. What we're doing is we're just mindfully choosing balance over our suppressed pain. We're choosing this instead of staying in that place of regret and everything. It's just staying present with your grief and through your grief. And then don't forget that we have spiritual support. Spirit is always with us. So, when it hurts and when it's I mean, I've cried on the floor and just felt like, why am I not good enough? Why is it not ever enough? And I feel like, if it's a release that we need of crying, then we do that and we let it go. But in a way, it was praying. It was saying, I don't want to feel this way anymore. So leaning into spiritual support is important. And I feel like, just know that as a process, you're going to embrace the necessary growth. And by doing so, you will be moving beyond your pain and your regret and your shame. And I definitely know this from my own experience. I know that my loss wasn't a true loss, but still it felt like one. And that's why I say, don't gloss over this step. Don't gloss over whatever you feel you've lost. Really acknowledge that for you, that mattered. And because it mattered, it needs to have its moment where you will actually face it and say, yes, it mattered. I'm not going to belittle it. I'm not going to push it to the side and say, oh, I've got other things to keep me busy and I've got life that I've got to live. And, I did involve my son in the opportunity to say, look, I'm starting to understand what I was motivated by. And I definitely addressed those things with him. So if you are working through your own process and you feel that there are any important people that you need to go to, either to ask for forgiveness or to say, look, I was really in a bad place then, but I understand myself better. That can really be very helpful. And another thing that might help is to have an intention statement for this part of processing your grief. So here it is. I accept that I have lost things that were very important to me, and my desire to be more balanced does not take away from my loss. I am willing to process this grief so that I can include this experience in my life's story of continuing growth and expansion. I believe that I am held and loved through my grief. Okay, and here's the amazing thing about grieving, okay? Willingness to admit our sadness in its fullness, even if it's just admitting it to spirit. It's not like having to go to therapy, although that would be fine, but just saying, I admit that my sadness is this big, it's just what it is. That makes it powerless to hurt us any more than it already has. Sometimes I think we think, no, I can't go there. My personal experience is admitting it in fullness, especially when we're doing so to spirit. I feel we are held and we can process that without it actually hurting us more. And remember the universal truth from my 5 Essential Perspectives video, connection to spirit guarantees balance, which means that if we're being awake to the grief, we're finally saying, I'm not going to gloss over it anymore, and we're willing to give our pain to spirit, that is a huge part of how it becomes neutralized for ourselves. It's never forgotten, but it is truly no longer holding on to us in the same way. Okay, so once we've processed the loss aspect, we also have to reevaluate our experience in a new way. Because if we've done the processing of not glossing over our loss, then we have really and truly started to make peace with that. And now we can move into reevaluating our experience. And I feel the most important thing there is we have to measure the how, not the who, the what, the when, the where, or the why. We measure the how, because we know all the details about what happened, the when, the where, But to fully own our wins, it's really about measuring how we met the experience. How did I meet the situation? How did I work through it? How did I bring integrity to it or show compassion through it? The thing that we're looking for there is the continuity of principles that we uphold in our lives, that we believe are so important. So if you're not aware of the principles that you feel matter, then take a moment to ask yourself, what really matters to me? Because it's those principles that we're trying to uphold. That's the thing that we say, well, how did I do on that? We have to look for the times when we acted out of honesty, out of compassion, out of dependability, loyalty, courage, integrity, self-discipline, or respect, responsibility, fairness. Those traits that we value as the most important for living an honest and open and authentic life, That's the stuff that we have to identify. When did I really live those things, despite what I was going through, or despite my own hurt? Because you did. I know you did. We do it all the time. But this is where we're starting to process our experience in a way that says, I've got to actually highlight those things. It's not like giving yourself some sort of ego boost. It's literally saying, I acknowledge that that's worth something. Okay? So those are absolutely your wins. Every time that you can say, you know, despite whatever I was going through, I can see how I brought courage to the situation, how I brought ingenuity to the situation, or how I brought humility, or whatever those principles that you value, you are able to say, I can now talk about my painful past, or the painful part of the past, in a new narrative. And that new narrative is that my pain was a stepping stone that helped me get to those wins. Remember, you know, we sometimes don't realize that we're all having universal life lessons. And I'm sorry that some lessons are dealing with having to go through pain in order to learn them. However, the point is, I got to that new phase of really saying, how did I embody my values in real life despite the struggle of it? How did I do that? Because when you can say, I succeeded, then that is understanding, yes, I have a success story. It's not success being measured by, oh, nothing ever happens and I make sure that no bad things touch my life. It's actually a success story of, regardless of what happens, how I am actually embodying the things that I believe in, and how I'm saying, well, how does that apply now in this situation? You know, because in real life time, to be able to say, I understand now how the very things that I've always believed, and that was my foundation, now I'm getting to actually see how do they look in application. And, you know, in my own story, I can tell you that what I started to do is I started to interrupt those old patterns every time they came up in my mind of, you know, having to prove that I was enough and that I had it all together. I really prayed a lot to be alert to those kinds of thoughts, because it was old patterns that I didn't know yet how to remove myself and reframe. But praying really helped me, because I kept saying, you know, whenever it would come up, I would just say, no, help me to discard that. And I really accepted that I was playing a part in bringing balance to a situation of ending a cycle that I feel, you know, was motivated actually by my own father's pain. He was in a mode for himself of never having thought he was good enough for his father. And isn't it important that at some point we break the cycle? And so regardless of the fact that I have regret that I came down so hard on my son, that it was a shock to his system, and that I had so much that I had to work through with him because of that, because of my own struggle and my own pain. But to realize, okay, well, you know, it started with my dad and his own pain, probably started with his dad too, but now I was breaking that cycle and I was bringing awareness to it. First, with my own awareness of I didn't like how I was behaving, and so I began to notice the mind frames that I was stuck in, and then being able to say, how do I reframe this? You know, and that's where I really went to the core principles that I believed in, and also did a lot of self-help books and so forth. But whatever we do to become more aware, you know, we are doing that part of returning to balance for ourselves. And that was the essential initial part, so that I could then say, okay, now I can actually talk to my son. And he was older by this time, and I was able to say, look, I can be honest and accountable for the fact that at the time I didn't realize what I was doing, but now that I do, I want you to know that I'm sorry. And I know that my unresolved pain was hurting you. And I think just being able to say so allows for the child who already knows that, you know, I mean, without consciously knowing, they realize that there's something going on. And yet, you know, they figure, well, it's just me, you know, I was behaving badly then, so my mom came down hard on me. But for him to see that he had a sense of trust that there is a desire in my mother to come to her own balance. And I know that it has gotten him a little bit off balance, and he's shared that with me. So even though I wish that I had never even created those issues for him, even then I have to trust that he has his own universal learning experiences to go through. And maybe I'm a part of that, even though I wish I could have helped him avoid it. And through those experiences, I've just focused on the fact that he has become a very strong and balanced man himself. So I think that is such a blessing. And regardless of what we went through in his young years, to know that he is able to see that balance is this process, and we're working towards it. And for me to encourage him that regardless of the fact that I feel I was a part of some of the things that he now has to face, that he's equipped to do so and do so well. That part has really been helpful. So in this second part of processing, where we're looking at measuring how we went through the experience, here's an intention statement. I accept that the only thing I have control over is my intention, so I will measure my experience by how I worked my way through it. I am willing to release the things I couldn't control and trust that I am not responsible for anything more than my part in the experience. I believe there are wins from every experience, and I want to fully acknowledge them. Okay, to recap, we've covered a few things in this video. We've looked at the obstacles that are keeping us stuck in our pain, the do more or perfectionist and judgment kind of thoughts that we have. And we've looked at two perspectives that we need to reframe when we're looking at our regrets. One of them is that continuity perspective about life experiences that help us see all things as helping us to achieve more personal balance, which is basically alignment with universal balance. And we looked at ground rules for fair assessment of the situation, because we need that self-honesty and self-compassion to finally make peace with things and say, look, I face all my flaws, I face the deficits that I may have brought to the table, but I don't take all the responsibility. And that is a huge part of bringing ourselves back to balance. We've also looked at how to process the experience to define your wins, releasing the pain of regret by first fully grieving the experience instead of toughing it out because it's not that bad. We just said no matter what, if it's a loss that you felt, then you have to acknowledge it. It's your loss and it was important to you. And we also looked at how to reevaluate the experience so that you can find your wins, because your wins, regardless of the details of the experience, are in how you met the experience and how you are continuing to heal, find balance, grow, and expand. And those things truly, truly matter so very much. So remember, there is always a win in every situation. It's about you becoming more vibrationally balanced, more grounded in the strength of your natural state so that you can speak up and you can be more strong in the principles that you uphold, in more positive, more forward-moving, boundary-holding, more expansive. That's what you're becoming more of. And also, it's about you saying no to unhealthy things and learning to say more fully yes to positive and proactive things. And that's all we can do, is move forward. And therefore, I just want to leave you with this. You can't find balance if you're holding some things apart from you and denying their importance in the entire journey. I know they're there. I know you went through them. But it's important to bring them into your story as, okay, I can start to see what I gained from it. And we must never undervalue even the smallest of wins. We have to acknowledge our successes within the regrets. These are the things that I think this video really can help with. And when we incorporate those into the narrative of the life we are living, then we are really taking the wins and leaving the regrets. We are seeing challenges as stepping stones. And it's definitely part of a growth mindset, but it's also very much a part of a balanced mindset and a balanced journey, just wanting to find our personal balance so that it doesn't infect whatever we had from the past, can be brought forward and not the pain part doesn't infect us anymore, and like my son and my dad, and then me, and then my son, you know, just wanting to clear that and say, from here on forward, it doesn't have to be so much like that. Okay, so it's your turn now. I'd love to hear from you, so share a comment with me below. Let me know where you're at in this journey of taking the wins and leaving your regrets. And I hope that if you liked this video, you'll give me a thumbs up. Your interaction means the world to me, and it helps me to not just feel like I'm speaking to an empty void. So talk back to me and let me know where you're at in life, what's going on, what your thoughts are. And I will see you in the next video.